What is one unsolved murder case that is just next level horrifying and bone-chilling to you? I'll go first. Mine is the mysterious death of Nura Fuller. She was a 16-year-old girl who responded to a newspaper ad for a nanny job that she desperately wanted. The man who placed this ad is only known as John Bennett, and so she meets this man at what he said was his house. But this address actually just led back to a vacant lot. No house ever existed there. Her body would eventually be found in an abandoned building that was mysteriously rented a few days prior to her going missing. The house only contained one cheap bed and one chair, which was also rented right before she disappeared, all presumably by this same man. Not a lot about this case is known, but what details we do have are so disturbing that they will keep you up at night. So let's talk about it. This is 16-year-old Nura Fuller. In 1902, she lived with her mom and younger siblings in San Francisco, California. The entire past year had not been great to the Fuller family, as Nora's mom had left her second husband. This left the family with no stable source of income, and some of that financial responsibility ultimately fell on Nura, who was taken out of school to go and find a job. Finding a job didn't take long for her though, because in early January of 1902, Nura found an ad in the newspaper for a nanny position. It was placed by a man named John Bennett, and he was looking for a nanny for his baby. So on January 11th, 1902, Nura reached out to him, and John Bennett asked her to meet him at this local restaurant called the Popular Restaurant. Nura left her home that evening really excited to finally have some full-time work, but little did anyone know that this would be the very last time that she would ever be seen alive. A few hours go by, and Nura actually called her mom to tell her that the interview went great and that John Bennett wanted her to start right away. So instead of going to the restaurant, she was actually at his home. Nura told her mom the address, which was 1500 Geary Street. Her mom felt really off about this whole situation. She told Nura to just come home and that she could start at a later date, which annoyed Nura. Ultimately though, Nura agreed and told her mom that she was on her way home. But hours came and went, and she never showed up. Not long after, her mom reported her missing and gave the police the address to John Bennett's house. But when police showed up to check on them, what they found was shocking, because sitting at 1500 Geary Street was literally just a vacant lot. There was no house there. So this was an immediate red flag to Nora's mom, but sadly, the police didn't really take this case seriously at first. They did a light search for her, but I guess one of Nora's friends had recently run away. So they told Nora's family and the public that Nura must have just ran away too. Meanwhile, her mom was saying no, Nura would never do that, and she was more than likely kidnapped by this John Bennett guy. So a month goes by with radio silence from Nura. Police eventually went to the Popular Restaurant and spoke with the owner, since Nura was supposed to have gone there the night she disappeared. The owner told them some pretty disturbing things though. He said that there was a man there that night that was waiting for a young girl, presumably Nura. But this wasn't just some random man. The man who police suspect was John Bennett was actually a regular at this restaurant, and he had been for the past 15 years. They didn't know his real name. They only ever called him Tenderloin because he was obsessed with steak tenderloins and would always order that. But the owner said that he talked to this regular at around 5:30 that night, and the man told them that he was expecting a young girl, so if she showed up, to send her to his table. The girl never showed up though, which made this man super irritable to where he was pacing up and down the sidewalk until he eventually left. What set off alarm bells though was that since this man had been coming to this restaurant for the past 15 years, the staff there knew him pretty well, and one thing was for sure: he had no wife and no kids, and he would sometimes pretend to be a minister. The owner said that he knows that this man had no good intentions with Nura had they actually met up. Because they physically saw this man, they were able to give police a description of a possible suspect. He was around 40 years old, 5'9", weighed about 170 pounds, was very well dressed, and had a brown mustache. So although this was super helpful, Nura was still nowhere to be found, and this is when authorities started taking the case a bit more seriously. Nothing would really happen though for another month. So on February 8th, 1902, the landlord for 2211 Sutter Street had sent police to the house to conduct a welfare check. The house had been rented 3 days before Nora's disappearance by a man who said his name was C.B. Hawkins. He wanted to rent 2211 Sutter Street, but he told the landlord that he had no references to give because he was from out of town. But the man was dressed extremely well, and he offered to pay the entire first month's rent up front. So the landlord agreed and gave him the keys to the house. On the contract, he again signed his name as C.B. Hawkins. So bringing it back to February 8th, it was now a new month, yet Mr. C.B. Hawkins had not paid the rent, and when the landlord went to to knock on the door, he wasn't getting any answers. So he decided to send the police as something just felt off. And when authorities entered the house, they found a really eerie scene. It was like the house had sat untouched for a really long time. Dust and cobwebs were everywhere, and there was almost no furniture in the house, except for the bedroom. There was no source of heat or light, as the gas was never connected, and there was no food in the house either. So as police made their way to the bedroom, they saw a girl lying on the bed under a bunch of blankets. At first, it looked like she was sleeping, but as they peeled back the blankets, they found that this was actually Nura Fuller, and she was deceased. She'd been covered up to her neck in quilts, and the bed she was laying on was really small and cheap. Other than that, there was only one chair in the entire house, which was positioned to look at the bed. Lying on the bedroom floor was Nora's purse and her clothes, and a lot of letters addressed to a Mrs. C.B. Hawkins at 2211 Sutter Street. It was clear that Nura had been dead for some time before being found, and she was completely nude. Authorities found 2 black marks on her throat, one on each side of her larynx, and her cause of death was ruled as strangulation. Afterwards, she'd been horrifically assaulted, her body badly mutilated. The medical examiner said that it was clear just by looking at her that she had been unmistakably violated. No drugs were found in her system, although it could have been possible that she ingested some alcohol before death, and she was found to have eaten an apple about 2 hours before she died. What's really sad is that Nora's little brother was brought in to identify her, which he did, but he said that Nura had her unmistakable ribbon tied around her neck, which he fastened for her on the day she went missing. So now that it was very clear that this was not a runaway case, police started processing the scene and trying to track down John Bennett, or this C.B. Hawkins guy. They started with the mail that was all over the floor in the abandoned house. All of it was junk mail except for one circular letter addressed to Mrs. C.B. Hawkins. It was postmarked 10 days after Nura went missing, yet it was opened and put inside of Nora's jacket. There were also torn pieces of the Denver Post all over the bedroom floor, dated 2 days before Nura disappeared. There was also an empty bottle of whiskey and the butt end of a cigar, and I'm not sure if this is because this happened in 1902, but no DNA was able to be taken from either of those items. Authorities started asking the public for help, which actually provided some helpful information. So the owner of a local furniture store nearby came forward and said that he actually met C.B. Hawkins, and he fulfilled an unusual request for him. C.B. was dressed super well in expensive clothing, which stood out to the store owner. He asked the owner for the cheapest bed he had and a plain chair, along with some quilts. The same quilts that Nura would later be found wrapped up in up to her neck. C.B. demanded that this be delivered that night or not at all, which they agreed to. And again, he signed the furniture order as C.B. Hawkins, just like the lease agreement at 2211 Sutter Street. This all happened on January 9th, 1902, so 2 days before Nura disappeared. So that night, a young delivery boy from the furniture store showed up to 2211 Sutter Street, as per his specific request. The house was really dark as C.B. never had the power turned on. This made the delivery a little bit difficult, so he asked C.B. if he could turn the lights on, which kind of spooked him a little bit. C.B. instead said to just leave the furniture outside and he would bring it in himself, which was weird, but that's what he did. Now that authorities had some sort of written trail for this guy, they decided to compare the handwriting from not just the furniture store and the lease contract, but also to the nanny ad posted in the newspaper, which Nura responded to, and it came back that all 3 signatures were a match. So not only was C.B. Hawkins a fake name, but so was John Bennett, and in reality, they were the same person. So because of this, authorities thought that it wouldn't be long until they would track this guy down, but that was not the case. Whoever killed Nura has never been found, and to this day, her murder remains unsolved. And although we don't know what happened to her or who was responsible, there are a few theories and suspects. So theory number 1 was that Nura possibly knew her killer, and this was backed up by one of her closest friends, Madge. Madge insisted that Nora's killer was this rich older man named Bennett who Nura had secretly been dating. I guess Nura had recently been sneaking out and going to hang out with this man behind her mom's back, so it was very secretive and no one really knew. Madge said that Nura really seemed to like Bennett a lot, and she thinks that the ad in the newspaper was actually just a trick to be able to sneak out and go see him. Her reasoning was that the ad specifically asked for a white nanny, which was odd and didn't need to be said. So either this ad was placed by an outsider not from California, or it was like a secret code for Nura by this John Bennett guy. Some people agree with this theory because of the way Nura was found. She was found wrapped up in quilts and tucked into the bed like she was sleeping, not just dumped somewhere. Maybe her killer felt bad and had some remorse after the fact. One thing was super clear though, and that was that the Sutter Street house had been clearly rented and staged for her murder. The killer very meticulously planned every single detail of Nora's murder, which is terrifying. Theory number 2 is that Nura didn't know her killer, and that the ad in the newspaper was a ruse to lure a young girl to her death. The only suspect that police ever had was a local man named Charles B. Hadley. Charles was an accountant for the San Francisco Examiner, and he apparently lived with his girlfriend in town. When police went to his house, Charles was nowhere to be found, but his girlfriend was there, and she told authorities that Charles had actually disappeared the morning Nora's body was found. She said it was really weird because every morning Charles would go into the bathroom and read a newspaper on the toilet. The morning that Nora's body was found, Charles had just up and vanished. But when his girlfriend checked the bathroom, in the toilet was his newspaper, and in that newspaper was an article about Nora's disappearance. She thinks that he was probably responsible somehow and just freaked out and took off. She thinks he was involved because shortly after Nura disappeared, she was doing Charles's laundry and found blood all over his clothes. At that point, she didn't know where the blood came from or anything about Nura at all, so she burned all the clothes. And the one final piece of evidence that kind of puts the nail in the coffin is what Charles used to obsessively eat. Any guesses? Steak tenderloin, just like the regular at the restaurant. His girlfriend gave police a photo of Charles B. Hadley, and usually he was clean shaven, but his girlfriend said that in the days before all of this happened, he bought a fake brown mustache and would wear it all over town. So police took this photo and altered it to have a brown mustache, and then they showed it to everyone this mysterious man interacted with. So the restaurant owner, the landlord for 2211 Sutter Street, and the furniture store owner and the delivery boy. And shockingly, they all agreed that this was the mystery man. Either John Bennett or C.B. Hawkins, whatever fake name he gave, this was all the same man. I guess it sort of makes sense if his name was Charles B. Hadley to go by C.B. Hawkins. But police began digging into Charles's past, and they found that he had family in Chicago, but also that Charles B. Hadley wasn't even his real name. His name was actually Charlie Start, and Charlie was known to have weird interactions in his past with other 16-year-old girls just like Nura. His face was blasted everywhere, and police began another massive manhunt for him. But to this day, he has never been found. So he's never been charged, but to a lot of people, and honestly myself included, it really seems like he was responsible for this crime. Some think that he ran off and lived out the rest of his life under a new identity, while others think that he killed himself not long after being discovered. Either way, he was never found, and it's now been 123 years. Yet whatever really happened to Nura that night and why remains a mystery.